it's a huge game, Charlotte, for Chelsea as well. And they're going for a top 5 finish to get into the Champions League next season. But this is against the backdrop of something that Sam Wallace has talked about in the Sunday Telegraph, the ban on Enzo Fernández, the self-imposed ban from Chelsea after he was flirting, shall we say, with Real Madrid. Sam writes, still no relenting on the strangest disciplinary decision of the year so far. A perverse decision given the pressure on the team and their young manager. This episode could easily have been minimised, whatever was happening behind the scenes and whatever point needed to be made to Fernandez's teammates. When you saw that Chelsea themselves had banned Enzo Fernández for 2 games, was it an act of hurting themselves rather than trying to make a point?
I didn't know if it was sort of like a power play from a young manager. He's come in and everyone seems to think he comes across as a really nice guy, doesn't he? And sometimes nice guys aren't the ones that win. So I don't know whether he's come into the dressing room because he's maybe not got the authority of a serial winner who's come in the dressing room. And so he's come in and he's using Enzo Fernández as an example, saying, you cross a line that I don't like and there will be consequences. But Sam's right there in terms of you're doing it at a time when you desperately need to win, and one of your key players is sat out. Obviously they didn't need him, they didn't miss him against Port Vale, did they? And I think that was sort of the perfect antidote after the international break, wasn't it, in terms of a good easy win takes the heat off everything that's been going on behind the scenes. But now they've got this absolutely massive game against City today, and through their own doing they're missing one of their best players. So it'd be interesting, obviously, if they go on to lose, if we're all talking about the role that Enzo Fernández could have played for them today. So, yeah, it could end up backfiring.
Dan, the big talking point has always been about managers and how Chelsea approach not only managerial recruitment but player recruitment as well. And the narrative from their side has been, we want stability and we want a long-term project. And yet, under this ownership, it's the 5th permanent manager at Stamford Bridge in less than 4 years. Are there any signs that the project is working how they wanted it to? And player recruitment needs to be included in this argument as well. What needs to change?
Well, I think, obviously there's been a big managerial churn at Chelsea, but I think in some respects, kind of Rossini is the perfect sort of Blueco head coach, isn't he? Not least because he came from Strasbourg, which is another Blueco club owned by the same people as Chelsea. I think he's a coach more willing to just be on the training ground and look after the players than, say, Pochettino, who wanted to be an old school manager in a more traditional sense. So that there is alignment there, and I think what we understand about this Enzo decision is that it was a club one. It wasn't just Rossini making the call. He had the backing of the ownership. So I think in theory, this this should work perhaps better than it did under previous managers who wanted more power and wanted more control. Because obviously, the ownership and the sporting directors are going to tell the coach to some extent, we want you to do this, and the coach is going to have to listen. We know that about Chelsea now. But I think to Charlotte's point, this is a big kind of power play. It's a risk. It would have been much less risky to deal with this quietly behind the scenes. I suppose at least to Chelsea's credit and Rossini's credit, they didn't just ban him for Port Vale, because that would have been really token. So fair play for kind of following through with it. This is a big game. It could have a really big say in whether Chelsea are playing Champions League football next season.
On that, I mean, like Dan mentioned earlier about results dictate everything with these sort of things, the perception of them, like even going as far as kind of lines a manager says before a game. But with this, I have to say, I'm probably more sympathetic to Chelsea and maybe a little bit more, I think, not to say necessarily admire the decision, but you can see where they're coming from. Because obviously, as you mentioned, a big element of Rossini's time so far is whether he has the experience for the job and by extension, the authority. And just from little things I've heard, and I suppose we can see it a little bit maybe, there is a suspicion that there was an element in the dressing room that was beginning to question him, that he's been feeling some of the pressure. I mean, you can maybe see that in some press conferences. Even I wrote myself in the newsletter I do for The Independent, people notice a change in his behaviour at the training ground. And if you're in that situation, and if a core of the dressing room maybe starts to kind of, see or test a manager's authority, they've got to put their foot down. And I think that is what this represents. I think that's where it could be important, even while that can be consistent with other conversations around the ownership and the approach to the club. But I have to say, I do think this is maybe necessary for a senior.
I suppose there's different ways of putting your foot down though, isn't there? Because most managers as well, if you ask them in a press conference about comments that players made like that, they'll brush it away and they'll be like, oh, we'll deal with that internally. So even just voicing it publicly, that's one way of like shaming, as it were, the player. I don't know, fine them or ban them for a game or something. I just think that when so much is on the line, especially when you look at Chelsea's finances as well and the boost that they really need by getting in the Champions League, it's such a massive risk. And I know players come out and say and do things all the time that managers don't necessarily agree with it. It's just like, it's that balance, isn't it? Like, has it gone a tiny bit too far banning him for 2 games? Well, only time's going to tell, isn't it?
Well,
really?
I think this is about more than the comments, though. I think it's about dressing room authority, I think.
When I first started covering Spurs in 2014, Pochettino came in, and that season he almost permanently had one player on the naughty step the whole time. You know, it started off, I think it was Kapui, then it was Adebayor, then Andros Townsend had a clash with a fitness coach and he was out, and there was always a player out in the cold, and it was this kind of permanent example to the squad that I'm the boss, and if you cross me or you're not aligned with my philosophy, you're out the side. And I wonder if a senior's trying to stamp his authority in the dressing room in a kind of similar way.
Well, someone at another club said to me this week that this sort of thing can sometimes help, especially when you've been in a situation like Chelsea have, because even the forcing of an argument or an intervention creates a kind of a clear the air situation. And if you've got like an element of it is kind of keeping a certain tension in the dressing room, because obviously Chelsea have had difficulties lately, and you know, maybe this might add actually a little bit of fire to what they're going to do today.
The possible problem is, though, that as the point Sam Wallace makes, is that players do this all the time. You know, Cucurella's done something not dissimilar, and a precedent has arguably now been set. You know, is a player going to be banned now every time they flirt, even kind of round the edges with another club? Because it's hard to maintain that kind of level of discipline, isn't it?
Fantastic stuff. In a word, because it's going to be a big game for City, clearly. They could cut the lead to 6 points. Crystal ball time. Who wins the title? Miguel?
I think Arsenal just grind it out in a potentially very, very anxious way for them.
It's going to be nervy and anxious, whatever.
Yeah, I'm
Charlotte?
sticking with Arsenal. I think they'll find their way.
I better go City then.
A really, really good position to try and claim that top 5 finish is Manchester United. And we didn't think we'd be talking about that, but for a few months ago, until Michael Carrick came into the role. The Sunday Telegraph and the Sunday Times as well, they've both gone with a big interview with Bruno Fernandes. I'm from a family where card games are a matter of life and death. This is a big chance for Manchester United to cement Champions League football next season, perhaps an unexpected chance, for the reasons I mentioned before. Clearly, Bruno Fernandes is going to be key to everything that United do between now and the end of the season, isn't he?
He's been key to Manchester United since he signed, and I think there's a strong argument. You could argue that he's actually one Premier League player of the season for the impact that he has at Manchester United, the points that he wins them. And like you said, I don't think earlier in the season anyone thought we'd be sat here talking about them being in pole position really to land one of those Champions League places. Carrick's gone in there, he's steadied the ship. The interview in the Times and obviously the Telegraph is really interesting, because quite a lot of time you interview these footballers and it's all about football, isn't it? And in terms of, oh, this is how I play, this is how many goals I want to score, but it was really about him as a person, isn't it? And we were talking, saying, is he really that nice? And there's so many anecdotes in there about people from the club or people outside of the club that he reaches out to, and the amount of time he spends with academy kids, working with them on the training ground and stuff like that. And you really get the impression there that he loves Manchester, he loves Manchester United Football Club, although he wouldn't go as far as to commit his future past the end of his next contract. But he is, absolutely massive for Manchester United in every single thing that they do. He could still break the Premier League assists record. He's really close to that. So, it's been an exceptional season for him. And if Manchester United do manage to get Champions League football, which would be a massitive boost for them, will be the reason behind it.
And he's holding the cards now suddenly, isn't he? Because of his form. He's got the rest of this season plus an option, is that right? Is that until the summer of 2027?
And there's talk that there is actually a clause in it where if one of the big European clubs comes in and they can trigger it, I think it's for £50-something million, and I think that might be in the summer, but that's just like chatter rather than confirmed. So they'll be doing everything they can to keep him at the club. There was obviously that interest from Saudi, wasn't there? And he came out and he explained, him and his agent, why he wasn't going to go there and why he's staying. And in the interview, it does say the reason to stay would be whether he believes in the project. And if he obviously is seen enough to believe that Manchester United can go on and challenge again, then why would he leave? He's been there for so long, and what's he won, an FA Cup and a Carabao Cup as well. So I think he wants, if you've invested that much of your career to a club and it's become your life, then you could see why he would want to stay. And hopefully, if he genuinely believes that they can win the Premier League, then I can't see why he would want to leave.
Just on the project, Miguel, he was asked what will it take for United to challenge for the title. He said, difficult to say because we changed manager. We were building something under Ruben Amorim and now we need to change. The club decided to change, and with Michael Carrick we have this last spell where we've been great until now with the opportunity of the Champions League next season. So let's move it forward into the Michael Carrick situation. It's looking increasingly likely now, isn't it, that he will get the role full time, not only because of how he's been performing since he took over, but also the candidates potentially that could challenge him for that role. Yeah,
I think that's exactly it. He's done well, and I think crucially he's stabilised the club. So after that, and given what they've experienced the last few years, it was actually conspicuous, I suppose, that Bruno Fernandes talks about how they were building something under Amorim, because it didn't look like it was going to be anything especially high with the way results were going. Whereas Carrick has stabilised it. Look, I've heard a little bit that maybe some people at the club would be interested in someone of Luis Enrique's stature if he was available, but I don't think that's going to be the case. And if they can't go big on Luis Enrique, then there's not many guarantees out there. I think that's a pretty crucial thing. Whereas in a world where there are no guarantees, Carrick and the team around him feel like they offer a necessary assurance after so much disruption.
The Star on Sunday, Dan, focus on the next game, and it is a big one, a huge rivalry, Manchester United and Leeds United, and a huge game, you'd have to say, not only for United but for Leeds as well.
Yeah, I think it's a massive game, obviously, at both ends of the table. And, we touched on it in the last section, but, Leeds feel like the side down there that perhaps Spurs have worse form, but for different reasons, Leeds could easily be kind of sucked into that bottom three relatively quickly. I think that, one thing going for Leeds is there's no doubt that they're going to be up for this game. It's arguably their biggest game. On paper, Daniel Farke will have them well prepared. They've had a long time to prepare for it, obviously. And I think, it could definitely be consequential.
Charlotte, Michael Carrick had a say or was involved in the decision-making with regard to Harry Maguire and his new contract. So that might give us a clue about what Manchester United are thinking long-term. With that in mind, surely he'd be in the conversations about what the summer recruitment is going to be like. And with regard to recruitment, it's been the age-old issue since Sir Alex Ferguson left the football club that, aside of the managerial turnaround, the amount that they've spent on signings that simply haven't worked, have we started to see a change in that, particularly in the last summer, where by and large the signings that were made have worked? And how important is it going to be this summer that they don't get anything wrong? Because they can't afford to, can they?
No, it's vital, and it'd be a massive summer for them. Obviously, they need to definitely strengthen in midfield. That's their priority of where they want to strengthen. And in terms of how involved Carrick's going to be in those discussions now, he's the manager. They've got a short list of players, but they've changed so much in the background in terms of the strategy, in terms of the technical director, the football director. Everything's changed there for a reason, and the idea is that was set up, and then the manager could come and go, not necessarily that they'd want that, but all that structure would stay the same. So a lot of the pressure is on those other people in the background as well to get that right. And you're right in terms of the hundreds of millions of pounds they spent trying to fix Manchester United's problems in front of goal from last season, and it's paid off, hasn't it? Because they've been a lot better. So now they're moving on to the next piece of what they believe is the jigsaw, is the midfield. But they do need to get the recruitment right, and the difficulty they've got is obviously they're in the market with Manchester City, say, for Elliot Anderson. So if you're Elliot Anderson, you want Champions League football, so securing something like that is going to be so much easier for them to sell the club. You still might want to go to Manchester City and work with Pep Guardiola, but all those conversations around selling a team are going to be so much easier if they do confirm Champions League football, but it's a massive summer for them, especially if, like Harry Maguire said in his interview that he did this week, that he believes they can challenge for the title again. But as Bruno Fernandes stopped short of saying what they need to be able to do that, and it seems to be quite a lot, even given their upturn in form. So yeah, going to be an interesting last few weeks of the season for them.
Arsenal may end up owing a huge debt of gratitude to Andrea Berta for what has quietly become one of their most lethal weapons in the Premier League title race. Mikel Arteta often refers to his substitutes as finishers, and the numbers back him up. They've been making a massive difference all season long. The idea first took shape back in 2023 after a long conversation with England rugby coach Eddie Jones, but it truly came to life last September in Bilbao. On that night, Arsenal secured an impressive 2-0 away win over Athletic Club at San Mamés in the Champions League, thanks to late goals from Leandro Trossard and Gabriel Martinelli. Both forwards also assisted each other, and after the match, Arteta was quick to praise the decisive impact of his finishers. Interestingly, more than 2 years earlier, Arteta had described his substitutes as impact players, but the term never really stuck. This time, however, finishers has become part of Arsenal's identity, largely because of the incredible influence these players have had, both domestically and in Europe. The term wasn't just symbolic either. Arteta and his coaching staff deliberately embraced it to remove any sense of disappointment among players left out of the starting 11. There's now a strong belief within the club that these finishers are just as important as the starters. They carry the responsibility of stepping onto the pitch and deciding games, and more often than not, they deliver. The stats speak volumes. After Kai Havertz's midweek winner in Lisbon, Arsenal lead all clubs in Europe's top 5 leagues for goal contributions from substitutes, with 38 in total, 24 goals and 14 assists. Spain's Celta Vigo sits second with 34, tied with French giants Paris Saint-Germain. No other Premier League side even cracks the top 10 in Europe. Within England, Chelsea come closest to Arsenal, with 27 goal contributions from substitutes, 17 goals and 10 assists. Remarkably, even teams not competing in Europe, like Leeds, Fulham, and relegation-threatened Wolves and Burnley, have produced more impact from the bench than Manchester City, who have just 10 contributions, 5 goals and 5 assists. Another encouraging sign for Arsenal is that they've already surpassed last season's total of 25 combined goals and assists from substitutes, with potentially 11 games still to play. Last season, teams like Brighton, Tottenham, Aston Villa, Liverpool, and Manchester United all recorded more goal contributions from the bench than Arsenal. This time around, however, Arteta's side has outperformed them all, highlighting the real value of the squad depth built under Andrea Berta last summer. At times, Berta's work at the Emirates has faced criticism, especially with big signings like Victor Gyökeres, Noni Madueke, and Eberechi struggling for consistency. But their arrivals have undeniably strengthened the squad's depth and overall quality. That depth was evident in January, when Arsenal felt confident enough to send Ethan Nwaneri out on loan to Marseille. Back in January 2025, the Gunners were desperately searching for attacking reinforcements until the final moments of the transfer window due to an unprecedented injury crisis. Injuries have still been an issue this season, but the difference now is clear. Arsenal have the depth and quality to cope, and that could be what ultimately keeps their title dream alive. That added depth hasn't just helped Arsenal survive difficult moments, it has reshaped the way they approach matches. Opponents are no longer facing a team that fades late on. Instead, they're up against a side that becomes even more dangerous as the game progresses. Fresh legs, tactical flexibility, and players capable of changing the rhythm instantly have turned Arsenal into one of the most unpredictable teams in Europe. Inside the dressing room, this shift has also strengthened competition. Players know that starting a match is no longer the only path to influence it. Performances off the bench are now just as valued, and that internal pressure has raised standards across the squad. Training intensity has increased, and Arteta has more tactical freedom, knowing he can rely on multiple game changers at any moment. The psychological impact on opponents is just as significant. Teams that manage to contain Arsenal for 60 or 70 minutes are still left with the looming threat of high-quality reinforcements entering the pitch. It forces rivals to rethink their energy management and defensive structure, often leading to late mistakes, exactly the moments Arsenal have been exploiting. There has also been growing recognition across Europe of how effectively Arsenal have embraced this model. Analysts and former players have pointed to Arteta's adaptation as a reflection of modern football, where squad depth and in-game management are just as critical as starting lineups. The influence of ideas borrowed from other sports, like rugby, has only added to the sense that Arsenal are evolving ahead of many of their rivals. For Andrea Berta, this evolution is becoming a strong response to earlier criticism. While not every signing has delivered consistently, the collective impact of the squad he helped assemble is now difficult to ignore. Arsenal are no longer overly dependent on a small core of players. Instead, they have built a system where contributions come from every corner of the squad. As the title race intensifies, this could prove decisive. Fatigue, injuries, and fixture congestion tend to expose teams with limited depth, but Arsenal appear better equipped than most to handle those pressures. Their ability to maintain intensity across 90 minutes, and often decide games late, has already earned them crucial points. The challenge now is consistency. Maintaining this level of impact from the bench requires not only fitness and form, but also continued belief from players who may not start regularly. Arteta's man management will be tested, especially as expectations rise and every match carries greater weight. Still, there is a growing sense that Arsenal have found something sustainable. What began as a tactical idea has turned into a defining feature of their identity. And if their finishers continue to deliver in decisive moments, it may not just shape their season, it could ultimately define the outcome of the Premier League title race.